Today I will be sharing these stories of unexplained encounters at Yellowstone National Park through a new and exciting format as an experiment. These submissions have been turned into documentary-style eyewitness accounts. Keep in mind, data and facts contained herein are limited to the sources and dates I was able to find and may not be perfectly accurate. And most importantly, as with all the stories told on this podcast, they are alleged to be true and have not been verified for authenticity. Such is the nature of viewer submissions. So I ask that you listen, enjoy, and ponder these accounts. Then decide what you want to believe. We Went Missing. An encounter submitted by Nicholas J. On July 11, 2015, two Colorado high school teachers embarked on what should have been a routine summer vacation to Yellowstone National Park. Names have been changed for anonymity. Nicholas and Sarah, longtime friends since college, had planned their getaway as a respite from lesson plans and grading papers. A few days of moderate hiking in America's first national park. They had no way of knowing they were about to become part of a disturbing pattern that has puzzled park officials for decades. Yellowstone receives over 4.5 million visitors annually, yet maintains one of the most comprehensive search and rescue operations in the national park system, responding to about 370 incidents every 3 years. What happened to Nicholas and Sarah would add to a growing collection of unexplained encounters which challenge our understanding of what lurks in the park's 2.2 million acres of wilderness. After driving north from Denver, the teachers spent their first night in West Yellowstone before entering the park early on July 12th. The weather appeared ideal at the time. Their first destination was the Fairy Falls Trail, a moderate hike that promised spectacular views without excessive difficulty. The first day went exactly as planned, Nicholas would later recall. We hiked the Fairy Falls Trail, taking tons of pictures. We saw some elk in the distance and made it back to our car by mid-afternoon. The successful completion of their initial hike left both teachers feeling confident about their fitness levels and eager for the next day's adventure. They had selected the Mystic Falls Trail from their guidebook, a longer hike than Fairy Falls, but still within their comfort zone. Located at Biscuit Basin, approximately 3 miles north of Old Faithful, the trail offered a 2.4-mile round trip with 250 feet of elevation gain, culminating at a spectacular 70-foot waterfall. Now, July weather in Yellowstone presents extreme variability that catches even experienced hikers unprepared. While average high temperatures reach nearly 80 degrees Fahrenheit, conditions can shift dramatically within hours. Historical records document snow falling on July 4th, and the park's elevation, much of it above 7,000 feet, creates microclimates where temperatures can plummet below freezing, even in midsummer. Nicholas and Sarah began the Mystic Falls Trail around 8 a.m. on July 13th, joining several other groups at the busier trailhead. The morning started promisingly, but approximately 2 hours into their hike, the situation changed with alarming speed. Dark clouds rolled in. It started to rain harder than either of us expected, Nicholas remembered. The sudden storm exemplified Yellowstone's notorious afternoon thunderstorms, which peak between 11 a.m. and 7 p.m. and can trigger temperature drops of 30 degrees within hours. Lightning poses a significant threat in the park. 78% of Yellowstone's fires are lightning-caused, and the region ranks among the highest in the nation for lightning activity. The teachers found shelter under a cluster of trees and decided to wait out the weather rather than attempt to navigate the trail in dangerous conditions. The storm lasted approximately 30 minutes, leaving both hikers soaked but relieved. What happened next defied all logical explanation. Despite feeling energetic and well-rested from their hotel stay, both Nicholas and Sarah experienced something that would haunt them for years to come. As they sat beneath the trees waiting for their clothes to dry, an overwhelming drowsiness overtook them. "We both just fell asleep," Sarah later explained. "Not the kind of dozing off you might do on a lazy afternoon, but deep sleep, like someone had turned off a switch." This wasn't ordinary fatigue. University of Colorado research has demonstrated that wilderness camping can cause dramatic circadian rhythm shifts, with natural light exposure 4 times higher than urban environments, affecting melatonin production. However, such effects typically occur over several days, not minutes in the case of these teachers. Their experience lasted nearly 12 hours, an unprecedented duration of healthy adults sleeping on hard ground in an exposed wilderness environment. When Nicholas regained consciousness, it was already dark. His watch confirmed what seemed impossible. They had been unconscious for almost 12 hours. Sarah awakened simultaneously, both displaying symptoms of grogginess and disorientation, which suggested something far beyond normal sleep. "What happened?" Sarah asked, checking her own timepiece in disbelief. "How did we sleep that long?" It should be noted that Yellowstone search and rescue statistics reveal predictable patterns for how hikers become lost. Fatigue and physical condition account for 22.8% of incidents, insufficient information or errors in judgment for 18.8%, and inadequate equipment for 8%. The teacher's situation fell into none of these categories. They were experienced hikers with proper equipment who had simply lost nearly half a day to inexplicable unconsciousness. In the fading light, the familiar trail markers had vanished. Everything appeared different, disorienting. Their headlamps provided limited visibility, and the batteries were already running low, another strange detail that added to their growing panic. The teachers began walking, hoping to locate the main trail or reach higher ground where their cell phones might capture a signal. Sarah occasionally managed to get 1 bar of coverage, but it was never enough to complete a call. As they moved through the darkened forest, they became aware they were being followed. The footsteps began as a barely perceptible sound behind them, matching their pace exactly, allegedly stopping when they stopped, resuming when they moved forward. When Sarah called out at one point, "Hello? Is someone there?" only silence answered, but the footsteps continued their relentless rhythm. What the teachers saw next would transform their understanding of what inhabits Yellowstone's vast wilderness. Between 2 trees, approximately 50 yards behind them, a figure stood, partially visible in the dim light from their phones, combined with their fading headlamps. It was tall, much taller than any human, perhaps even 7 feet in height, with a bulky, shaggy appearance, suggesting thick hair or fur covering its entire form. Sarah recalls whispering to Nicholas, "What in the world is that?" The creature appeared to be watching them, standing motionless like a sentinel in the darkness. It didn't look human, yet it maintained an upright posture that suggested intelligence and purpose. Every time they looked back, it was still there, sometimes partially hidden behind trees, sometimes standing openly, but always maintaining the same distance. Yellowstone's ecosystem supports approximately 700 grizzly bears, possibly up to about 1,030 bears as of 2024 data. Grizzly bears can stand up to 9 feet tall when upright on their hind legs. Black bears can reach about 5 to 7 feet tall. Bears commonly stand on their hind legs to investigate their surroundings, and based on viewing distance, it can lead to misidentification, particularly in low-light conditions. Research shows that even trained observers have a 12.5% misclassification rate in wildlife identification under challenging circumstances. However, what Nicholas and Sarah described differed significantly from known bear behavior. The creature's sustained bipedal stance, its deliberate stalking behavior, and its apparent awareness of being observed suggested something beyond conventional wildlife encounters. With their phone batteries dying too, and food supplies limited to granola bars and water bottles, provisions intended for an afternoon hike, not this overnight ordeal, the teachers found themselves in an increasingly desperate situation. They discovered a small cave opening, more of an overhang, and decided to rest while keeping watch on their mysterious pursuer. The creature positioned itself behind a large pine tree, about 30 yards out, partially concealed but clearly still visible. Its bulk extended beyond the tree trunk, and they could observe its side profile in the limited light. The most disturbing aspect was its breathing, heavy and loud, reminding them of a large dog panting. Sarah asked Nicholas in a low voice, "What do you think it wants?" Nicholas replied, "I don't know. I don't think it's a person, though." They maintained their vigil for hours, both too terrified to sleep, haunted by the possibility that their earlier unconsciousness had not been natural. And what if this entity had somehow caused their sudden slumber? The creature never moved from its position, seeming to wait with infinite patience for some unknown trigger. Around 3 a.m., the teachers made a critical decision. They could not remain in their exposed position indefinitely, and their water was running dangerously low. They needed to stay conscious and keep moving until dawn, hoping daylight might drive their stalker away. As Nicholas and Sarah began moving again, their pursuer resumed its relentless following too. They had accepted it might accompany them for a while, so their priority shifted to finding help or reaching a road. After about 2 hours of careful navigation, they spotted smoke rising above the trees, the unmistakable sign of a campfire. But as they approached the smoke source, Sarah grabbed Nicholas's arm with sudden alarm, letting him know that it was now right behind them. When Nicholas turned, he saw the creature much closer than before, only 10 yards away. In the pre-dawn light, more details became visible. It was massive, covered in dark hair, with long arms and a hunched posture that suggested both power and predatory intent. And its breathing was now clearly audible, as heavy panting seemed to fill the forest around them. The teachers broke into a desperate run toward the smoke. Behind them, they heard the creature beginning to run too, crashing through the underbrush with sounds that suggested enormous size and strength. They were certain it would overtake them before they made it to safety. They burst into a small clearing containing a recently extinguished campfire and scattered camping gear, but no people. The previous campers had apparently departed early or were simply elsewhere. Without stopping to investigate, Nicholas and Sarah continued running along what appeared to be a more established trail, leading away from the campsite. The wider, more developed trail eventually led to a dirt road, which they followed until signs appeared pointing toward a ranger station. Soon after that, they stumbled into the facility around 6 a.m., appearing haggard and exhausted after their night-long ordeal. The ranger on duty immediately offered water and food, recognizing the signs of hikers who had spent an unplanned night in the wilderness. When Nicholas and Sarah explained that they had been lost on the Mystic Falls Trail and wandered all night, the ranger showed appropriate concern. The situation changed dramatically when they mentioned being followed by something large and bipedal, approximately 7 feet tall and covered in hair. The ranger's expression shifted immediately. It looked familiar to anyone who has reported an encounter that challenges conventional understanding. He asked standard questions about location, timing, and whether they had obtained photographs. When they admitted they had no photographic evidence and had only seen the creature clearly a few times in poor lighting conditions, the ranger's professional skepticism became apparent. He recorded their report in a logbook, but his actions suggested routine documentation rather than serious investigation. The Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization, or BFRO, database contains over 4,200 documented reports across North America. Yet no peer-reviewed scientific evidence supports the existence of such creatures. A 2009 study in the Journal of Biogeography demonstrated that Bigfoot sighting patterns are statistically indistinguishable from black bear distributions, strongly suggesting misidentification of known wildlife. The National Park Service itself maintains no official stance on cryptid encounters and does not systematically track such reports. For rangers accustomed to dealing with wildlife misidentifications, bear encounters, and hikers disoriented by altitude and exhaustion, Nicholas and Sarah's account likely fell into familiar categories of explainable phenomena. But not to the two teachers. The ranger drove the teachers back to their vehicle at the trailhead, providing additional water and suggesting they check in with medical services. They declined medical attention, wanting only to leave Yellowstone as quickly as possible. Back at the hotel, they packed their things immediately and departed the same day, abandoning their planned third day in the park. During their drive home to Colorado, Nicholas and Sarah discussed the most disturbing aspect of their experience: the 12-hour sleep that had preceded everything else. Both of them were healthy adults, with no medical conditions that might explain such an event. The timing, occurring just before they became lost and encountered the creature, seemed too coincidental to dismiss. Since 1968, Yellowstone has documented 12 to 15 missing persons cases, with 3 individuals still unaccounted for: Stuart Isaac in 2010, Bruce Pike in 2006, and Daniel Campbell in 1991. While the vast majority of the park's search operations end successfully, 93% of missing persons are found within 24 hours. A small percentage of cases remain unexplained. Nicholas and Sarah had narrowly avoided joining that grim statistic. Scientific research offers potential explanations for their experience. While Yellowstone's elevations of 7,000 to 8,000 feet can cause mild fatigue or shortness of breath in some visitors, such modest altitude effects cannot explain 12 hours of unconsciousness. Isolation-induced temporal disorientation is well documented, with researchers identifying 6 distinct patterns, including temporal vertigo and suspended time sensation. However, no credible scientific evidence exists for the type of missing time the teachers experienced. Sarah conducted extensive research after returning home, discovering numerous online accounts of similar encounters in national parks: tall, hairy creatures following hikers, unexplained periods of missing time, people becoming lost on familiar trails. Most such stories are dismissed as hoaxes or misidentification of known animals, relegated to the realm of internet folklore rather than serious investigation. The experience fundamentally changed both teachers' relationship with wilderness recreation. Nicholas continues hiking, but never in remote areas, and never with just one companion. Although Sarah has largely abandoned overnight trips, saying the encounter changed how safe she feels in the wilderness. I'd like to note, park statistics provide context for their experience. Males account for 77% of Yellowstone fatalities, with visitors aged 65 plus representing the highest risk group at 32% of deaths. The summer months prove most dangerous, with July accounting for 24% of deaths and August 20%. Weekend incidents comprise 40% of search and rescue operations, suggesting increased risk during peak visitation periods. Yet Nicholas and Sarah's encounter defies easy categorization with these statistics. They were not elderly hikers prone to medical emergencies. They were not inexperienced adventurers making poor decisions. They weren't weekend warriors pushing beyond their abilities. They were competent outdoor enthusiasts who experienced something that has challenged their understanding. The Hiker from Nowhere, a submission from Jackson W. In the spring of 2023, 4 longtime friends embarked on what had become an annual tradition, a fishing expedition to one of America's most celebrated wilderness destinations. These were seasoned outdoorsmen in their late 50s who had spent 15 years perfecting their craft in waters across the country. What began as a routine trip to Yellowstone's Madison River would culminate in an encounter that defied explanation and left them questioning the nature of reality itself. The Madison River system processes over 2,500 trout per mile through its pristine waters, making it one of North America's premier fishing destinations. Each year, thousands of anglers flock to these geothermally warmed waters, where the Gibbon and Firehole rivers converge, creating ideal conditions for wild rainbow and brown trout that average 12 to 16 inches, with documented specimens reaching 28 inches. But the Madison River holds more than just exceptional fishing. As you will see, it harbors mysteries. Kendrick W., Hollis B., Darren P., and the witness who recounts this story had cultivated their friendship over decades, bound together by successful careers and fortunate investments that afforded them all early retirements. Their twice-yearly fishing expeditions represented more than recreation. They were pilgrimages to waters that held the promise of both tranquility and adventure. For their May 2023 excursion, the group had secured a high-end RV and reserved space at Madison Campground, strategically positioned at 6,800 feet elevation, just 0.1 miles from the Madison River. The campground, one of Yellowstone's earliest opening facilities, contains 278 individual sites and serves as base camp for serious anglers targeting the river's legendary stretches, including 7 Mile Bridge, 9 Mile Hole, and the renowned Barnes Pools. Their arrival on May 14th coincided with optimal fishing conditions. Early May typically offers exceptional angling before spring runoff begins, with water temperatures ranging from 45 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit, ideal for trout activity. The men had experienced typical spring weather patterns, afternoon showers and cool nights, with temperature swings of 30 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit within single days, a common Yellowstone trait at that elevation. By Wednesday evening, May 17th, the friends had settled into their routine. They had been fishing a productive section of the Madison River, approximately 2 miles from their campground, enduring the kind of persistent spring rain that tests an angler's dedication. The cold precipitation had soaked through their waders for the past couple of hours, creating those miserable conditions that separate casual fishermen from true enthusiasts. Around 6 p.m., when the rain finally ceased, the group began collecting their gear for the day. Kendrick's voice carried across the water from downstream, urgent and concerned. He had discovered something, or someone, that would transform their peaceful fishing trip into something far more unsettling. Lying face down at the water's edge, approximately 30 yards from where they'd been casting, was a man in his 30s, average build, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt. But one detail immediately struck the witness as impossible. Despite the hours of steady rain that had thoroughly soaked the 4 fishermen, this individual was completely dry. In wilderness environments, the discovery of unconscious persons triggers specific protocols. Hollis B., drawing on medical training from his military service, immediately began assessment procedures that mirror wilderness first responder standards, checking for pulse, breathing patterns, and responsiveness. The man's vital signs appeared normal. He had a steady heartbeat and regular breathing, no obvious signs of trauma or distress. When they gently turned the unconscious man over, attempting to rouse him, his response suggested something beyond ordinary unconsciousness. His eyes opened immediately, but carried a wild and disoriented expression. "Where am I?" he asked, his voice trembling. "What is this place?" His reaction when told he was in Yellowstone National Park, near the Madison River, was one of escalating panic. He scrambled to his feet, brushing at clothes that showed no evidence of having been in contact with wet ground, and repeatedly expressed urgent need to leave the area right away. The man's inability to provide basic information, like his name, his origin, any memory of recent events, combined with his profound fear of remaining in the park, suggested something beyond typical disorientation. His repeated pleas for immediate departure seemed more like terror, which began to spread to the experienced outdoorsman. Back at their campsite, the friends offered food and water, both of which the mysterious visitor refused. He exhibited classic symptoms of severe anxiety, restlessness, constant scanning of the environment, exaggerated startled responses to normal sounds. These behaviors align with documented stress responses, but his persistent dryness remained inexplicable. When they decided to contact emergency services, their guest's reaction intensified dramatically. The suggestion of calling rangers or paramedics triggered near panic, with desperate pleas to simply drive him away from the park without involving any authorities. Now this pattern occasionally occurs in cases involving individuals with outstanding warrants, immigration concerns, or psychological conditions that create institutional fear. Kendrick W. discreetly contacted 911. The Madison campground's proximity to the historic Madison Information Station, built around 1929 to 1930, provides relatively good communication access compared to more remote park locations. Park Service Emergency Response utilizes the Incident Command System, with initial assessment focusing on life-threatening conditions before addressing identification issues. As they waited for emergency responders, fatigue from their long day began to affect the group. Hollis B. and Darren P. retired to the RV for brief naps, leaving Kendrick W. and the submitter of this story to maintain watch over their troubled guest, who had dozed fitfully in his chair despite his earlier agitation. Around 9 p.m., the writer and submitter of this story stepped into the woods behind their campsite for a bathroom break, approximately 50 yards from the fire. What he heard in the darkness there would haunt his days forever. Deliberate footsteps deeper in the forest, moving with human cadence through the underbrush. And more disturbing were the whispered voices, barely audible fragments that included phrases which he recalls as, "doesn't know," and "take him back." Now, medical literature documents cases of transient global amnesia occurring in wilderness settings, affecting maybe 5 to 20 per 100,000 people annually. Environmental triggers include physical exertion, cold water exposure, and emotional stress, all present in late spring Yellowstone conditions. However, our author suggests this was something beyond that. Upon returning to the campsite, he discovered Kendrick W. unconscious on the ground beside his chair, snoring loudly, which was odd because he was not a snorer, and he wouldn't just lay on the ground outside and go to sleep. As for the mysterious stranger, he had vanished entirely, leaving only a soaking wet camp chair where he had been sitting, fabric so thoroughly saturated that water was actively dripping onto the ground below. The chair had been completely dry when the man first sat down, and no precipitation had occurred since their return to camp. The volume of water there suggested far more than could have accumulated from any natural source available at their campsite. When Park Service personnel arrived around 10 p.m., an ambulance crew and a park ranger, they encountered an odd scenario. The missing person report lacked fundamental elements. No name, no physical identification, no clear medical emergency, and no witnesses to the actual disappearance of the subject. The park ranger conducted a thorough investigation, photographing the saturated chair and documenting the witness accounts in detail. However, without identification or evidence of criminal activity, park policy limited available responses. The National Park Service Case Incident Reporting System requires specific documentation protocols, so unidentified individuals who voluntarily leave pose unique challenges for law enforcement follow-up, if any at all. The paramedics examined Kendrick W., who could not explain his unconscious episode on the ground. A man who prided himself on mental sharpness and had no history of medical conditions that would cause sudden loss of consciousness. And yet there he was, unable to account for his significant gap in memory. This symptom does align with various medical conditions, like transient ischemic attacks, or environmental factors like mild hypothermia, which can occur even in temperate conditions and cause confusion and memory impairment, though in rare cases. The responding ranger noted that similar reports occasionally do surface. People turning up confused in the wilderness, only to disappear, likely just leaving the park on their own accord. Most of these accounts resolve as cases of substance abuse, mental health episodes, or just misunderstandings. As for cold water immersion, it can specifically trigger transient global amnesia in documented cases, with one medical report describing complete 20-minute memory loss during exposure to 20 degrees Celsius water. The Madison River's spring temperatures, ranging from 45 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit, fall well within the parameters that could trigger such responses in susceptible individuals. And yet, not all of the story can be explained, if our author's account is to be believed. The man's completely dry state, after prolonged rain exposure, contradicted any physical law. The massive volume of water that appeared on the chair suggested deliberate placement rather than natural accumulation. Most troubling, the whispered voices in the forest implied organized human activity rather than random medical emergency. So what was truly going on? The four friends departed Madison Campground the following morning, most of the group ready to just go home. Kendrick W, worried about his unconscious episode, did follow up with his doctor, had scans done, and found everything in working order. Later research into missing persons report from Yellowstone during that time frame yielded no matches for their mysterious visitor. And no follow-up reports suggested that the man simply left, or that no one was looking for him, except perhaps the ones who had been whispering in the forest. The Music from Nowhere, from Margaret K. In the late 1980s, one Margaret K and her research companion experienced something that would stay with them forever. What began as routine field work at Yellowstone Lake became an encounter with one of the park's most enduring and scientifically perplexing mysteries. Yellowstone Lake stretches across 136 square miles of pristine wilderness, its depths reaching 400 feet in some locations. The lake sits at 7,732 feet above sea level, where the thin mountain air creates unique acoustic properties. Since 1871, when F.H. Bradley of the Hayden Expedition first documented strange aerial sounds, researchers have struggled to explain the phenomenon known as lake music, mysterious whispers and metallic resonance that seem to travel through the air itself. Margaret K, who works in acoustic research, had arrived at Yellowstone in early summer to conduct atmospheric sound studies. Her work focused on how elevation and temperature variations affect sound transmission, making the park's diverse topography ideal for her research. She was accompanied by Robert M., her research partner, whose background involved studying wind patterns and their impact on acoustic phenomena. The two researchers had established their equipment at a secluded bay on the lake's southeastern shore, a location chosen for its relative isolation and minimal human interference. Their sophisticated recording devices, state-of-the-art for the 1980s, were designed to capture and analyze sound frequencies across the entire audible spectrum and beyond. On a particularly calm morning in late July, Dr. K had risen before dawn to calibrate their equipment, wanting to capture the acoustic properties of the lake during the transition from night to day temperatures. The morning was absolutely still. Dr. K would later recall, "We had 0 wind readings, and the lake looked like glass. These were exactly the conditions we needed for our baseline measurements." Around 6:45 a.m., as the first rays of sunlight began warming the lake's surface, their sensitive recording equipment detected something unusual. What started as barely perceptible vibrations in the lower frequency ranges quickly developed into something far more complex and inexplicable. The sound began as a low hum, almost below the threshold of human hearing. Dr. K noticed it first on her monitoring equipment, frequency spikes that shouldn't exist in the natural environment they were studying. As both researchers watched their instruments with growing confusion, the phenomenon intensified. "It wasn't coming from any single direction," Robert M. remembered. "Our directional microphones couldn't pinpoint a source. It seemed to be moving through the air above us, but there was nothing there." The lake music phenomenon has been documented by credible witnesses for over 150 years. Yet, no scientific explanation has ever been accepted. Professor Edwin Linton published detailed observations in the journal Science in 1893, describing slight metallic resonance in sounds that resembled both metal cables crashing and ethereal organ music. His meticulous documentation noted that the sounds appeared to travel horizontally through the air at considerable speed, lasting only moments but leaving profound impressions on listeners. What Dr. K and Robert M experienced that morning surpassed anything in the historical record, albeit allegedly. They claim the initial hum evolved into crystalline notes, almost musical in quality, accompanied by what sounded like whispered voices speaking in an unintelligible language. The entire episode lasted approximately 4 minutes, during which their recording equipment captured frequencies and patterns that defied conventional acoustic science. So we had sounds registering on our equipment that appeared to have no earthly source, Dr. K explained. The frequency analysis showed complex harmonics that would require multiple instruments playing in perfect coordination. But as we've stated before, we were completely alone on the lake. The whispered voices proved particularly unsettling. Both researchers heard what sounded like urgent conversation, too distant to understand, but clearly human in character. The voices seemed to move through the air above the lake's surface, traveling from northeast to southwest at what they estimated to be considerable speed. Robert M. attempted to photograph the area above the lake where the sounds seemed strongest, hoping to capture any visual phenomena that might explain the acoustic anomaly. However, his 35mm camera revealed nothing unusual in the developed prints, showing only empty sky above the tranquil lake surface. Most disturbing was the effect the experience had on their expensive recording equipment. Despite functioning perfectly before and after the episode, their instruments recorded only static during the 4-minute period when both researchers clearly heard the lake music. A later and more thorough look at the equipment revealed that they had been affected by powerful electromagnetic interference from some unknown source. The phenomenon ended as abruptly as it began. The crystalline notes faded to whispers, the whispers to silence, leaving both researchers standing in the profound quiet of early morning Yellowstone. Their instruments returned to normal function immediately, showing no trace of the electromagnetic disturbance that had overwhelmed them moments before. Dr. K spent the remainder of their research trip attempting to recreate the conditions that had produced the lake music. Despite deploying additional equipment and monitoring the lake for 2 more weeks, they never experienced the phenomenon again. Weather conditions, temperature gradients, and atmospheric pressure readings from July 23rd showed nothing unusual that might explain what they had encountered. Scientific theories proposed for the lake music range from seismic activity creating air pressure waves to static electricity discharging from the lake surface during specific atmospheric conditions. Some researchers suggest that temperature inversions over the lake might create acoustic mirages, similar to visual mirages, that can transport distant sounds from elsewhere in the park. However, none of those explanations account for the electromagnetic interference, which consistently accompanies authentic lake music encounters. Upon returning to her work, Kay faced the challenge of how to explain their experience to colleagues. The acoustic data they had collected was unprecedented, but the inability of their equipment to record the actual phenomenon raised more questions than answers. She eventually focused her subsequent research on atmospheric acoustic properties in high-altitude environments. The lake music phenomenon appears to be diminishing over time. While early park visitors reported regular encounters with the mysterious sounds, modern sightings have become increasingly rare. Some researchers suggest that increased human activity around Yellowstone Lake has somehow interfered with the conditions necessary for the phenomenon to occur. Others propose that geological changes in the lake bed or surrounding thermal features may have altered the acoustic properties that generated the mysterious sounds. The Porter Who Wasn't There, from Elena S. The autumn of 1994 brought unreasonably warm weather to Yellowstone National Park, extending the tourist season well into October. Among the visitors taking advantage of the extended season were Elena S. and her teenage daughter Carmen, who had planned a 3-day stay at the historic Lake Yellowstone Hotel as a special mother-daughter bonding trip before Carmen's senior year of high school. The Lake Yellowstone Hotel, constructed in 1891, stands as one of America's premier wilderness lodges. Its colonial revival architecture and elegant appointments have hosted presidents, celebrities, and countless families seeking respite in one of the nation's most spectacular settings. The hotel's 158 rooms have witnessed over a century of human drama, from romantic honeymoons to family reunions, but also tragedy and loss that some believe have left their mark on the grand old building. Elena S., a practical woman who worked in healthcare administration, had little patience for ghost stories or supernatural speculation. She had chosen the Lake Yellowstone Hotel specifically for its reputation for excellent service and historical significance, wanting to share with Carmen an appreciation for America's natural and architectural heritage. Well, their troubles began during check-in on a mid-October evening, when the front desk clerk apologized for assigning them to a third-floor room rather than their requested second-floor accommodation. The hotel was operating with reduced staff as the season wound down, and several floors were being prepared for winter closure. "We were told they were short-staffed because of the late season," Elena recalled. The young man at the desk seemed genuinely sorry about the room change, but he did promise the third floor would offer better lake views. Their assigned room proved to be spacious and elegantly appointed, with large windows facing Yellowstone Lake. Carmen was particularly delighted with the antique furnishings and the sense of history that permeated the room. Both women were impressed by the hotel's attention to detail and the courteous service from the staff they encountered. Their first evening passed pleasantly, with dinner in the hotel's grand dining room, followed by a walk along the lake shore. The late October weather remained mild, allowing them to enjoy the peaceful evening atmosphere that made the Lake Yellowstone Hotel famous among guests seeking tranquil retreat. The following evening, Elena and Carmen departed early for a day of sightseeing and photography around the park. They visited the Grand Canyon of Yellowstone, took the scenic drive through Hayden Valley, and spent the afternoon exploring the geothermal features around West Thumb. Their day concluded with dinner in the nearby town of Lake Village, before returning to the hotel around 9 p.m. As they approached the hotel's main entrance, Elena noticed a man in what appeared to be hotel uniform standing near the front steps. He was dressed in a style that seemed oddly formal, even for the traditionally elegant Lake Yellowstone Hotel. A dark suit with brass buttons, white shirt, a black bow tie that suggested the attire of hotel staff from an earlier era. "Good evening, ladies," they remember the man saying. "May I assist with your luggage?" Elena found his offer courteous, but unnecessary, as they were carrying only small day packs and camera equipment. However, Carmen had purchased several souvenirs during the day trip, and their bags were becoming cumbersome. "That's very kind of you," Elena replied, mentioning their room number. The man smiled warmly and reached for Carmen's heavier bags. Again, his appearance struck Elena as unusual. He looked to be in his early 30s, with neatly combed dark hair and a mustache that seemed more appropriate to the 1920s rather than the 1990s. His formal attire was impeccably maintained, without the wrinkles or wear that characterized the uniforms of working hotel staff at the end of a long day. As they entered the hotel lobby, Elena expected to see other staff members acknowledging their colleague, but the front desk clerk and the bellhop on duty seemed unaware of the man's presence. The helpful porter continued carrying Carmen's bags toward the elevator without any interaction with his supposed co-workers. Historical records from the Lake Yellowstone Hotel document numerous staff members who dedicated their lives to serving guests at the remote Wilderness Lodge. Many came and went, but there were a few in that history who of course died during their employment, though not necessarily at the hotel itself. But what if a person's spirit is especially attached to a certain place? The elevator to the third floor operated manually in 1994, requiring guests to pull a brass gate closed before pressing the floor buttons. Elena noticed that their helpful porter seemed familiar with the older equipment, operating it with the practiced ease of someone who had used it countless times. During the brief elevator ride, Elena attempted conversation with the man, asking how long he had worked at the hotel. His response was somewhat vague, mentioning that he had been taking care of guests for many years, and that he particularly enjoyed helping families make the most of their visit. When they made it to the 3rd floor, the porter insisted on carrying the bags all the way to their room, despite Elena's protest that they could manage from there. He walked happily down the hallway, seeming to know exactly where their room was located, without checking the room numbers at all. At their door, Elena fumbled in her purse for the room key, while the porter waited patiently with Carmen's bags. When she looked up to thank him after unlocking the door, he was gone. The hallway stood empty in both directions, with no sound of footsteps, no elevator operation to suggest where he might have disappeared. "Mom, where did he go?" Carmen had asked, looking around the empty corridor with confusion. Elena explains that she immediately checked the stairwell at the end of the hall, thinking the porter might have taken the stairs rather than waiting for the elevator. The stairwell was empty, and the heavy fire door showed no signs of recent use. Both the elevator and the stairs were clearly visible from their room's location, making it impossible for anyone to leave the floor without being seen. Troubled by the porter's disappearance, Elena called the front desk to inquire about the staff member who had helped them. The night manager listened to her description, but was confused by her account. Elena says the manager said something along the lines of, "Ma'am, we don't have anyone working tonight who matches that description. Our evening porter is a young woman, and our male staff members don't wear the type of uniform you're describing." Elena pressed for more information, describing the man's appearance and formal attire in greater detail, to be sure. The night manager's response grew more puzzled, finally asking if she was certain about what she had seen. He then explained that what she described sounded like a uniform they might have worn in the hotel's early days. Disturbed by the conversation, Elena decided to investigate further. She asked Carmen to remain in the room while she returned to the lobby to speak with the front desk clerk who had been on duty when they arrived. The young man remembered seeing Elena and Carmen enter the hotel, but had no recollection of anyone assisting them with luggage. "I would have noticed if one of our staff members was helping guests," he assured her. "We coordinate those services through the front desk, and no one requested porter assistance this evening." Elena's inquiries revealed that the Lake Yellowstone Hotel employed only 3 male staff members during their October stay, none of whom matched the description of the man who had helped them. The night manager, seeing Elena's confusion, offered an explanation that only deepened the mystery. He mentioned that several guests over the years had reported encounters with helpful staff members who seemed to disappear without cause, especially on the hotel's upper floors during the later part of the season. "Really, it's probably just confusion in the dim lighting," he suggested. "The hotel's older sections can create shadows and lighting effects that might be misleading." Elena was not satisfied with this. After all, the initial part of their encounter had occurred in the well-lit lobby. Both she and Carmen had observed the porter clearly and interacted with him for several minutes, making a case of mistaken identity highly unlikely. The remainder of their stay passed by without incident, though Elena found herself paying careful attention to the hotel staff members she encountered. None bore any resemblance to the helpful porter who had assisted them on their second evening, and none wore the formal attire that had characterized his appearance. Years later, Elena wonders about their helpful porter encounter. The experience left her more of a believer when it came to the supernatural. Lights Over the Thermal Fields, from James R. The winter of 1983 brought unusual atmospheric conditions to Yellowstone. But does that explain one James R.'s sighting? James, a researcher, and park worker Michelle D. experienced something amazing. Wyoming has consistently ranked among the top states for UFO sightings per capita, with concentrations around geologically active areas suggesting possible connections between electromagnetic phenomena and unexplained aerial objects. Yellowstone's geology creates the perfect state for observing atmospheric anomalies, whether natural or otherwise. James R. had arrived at Yellowstone in January 1983 to conduct studies on how extreme cold affects geothermal features throughout the park. His work required precise measurements of ground temperatures, steam output, and mineral content at various thermal areas during the harsh winter months when tourist access was severely limited. Michelle D., who worked for the park during winter months, had volunteered to assist with James R.'s research as part of her ongoing education in earth sciences. Her familiarity with the park geography and winter survival skills made her an ideal field companion for the challenging work of collecting data in sub-zero conditions. On an evening in early February 1983, the two researchers had completed a long day documenting thermal activity in the Norris Geyser Basin area. Norris represents Yellowstone's hottest thermal area, with underground temperatures exceeding 400 degrees Fahrenheit and surface features that remain active even during the most severe winter weather. As they prepared to return to their winter quarters, unusual weather conditions began developing around the thermal basin. Temperature inversions, where warm air lies above cold air, had created a distinct boundary layer, approximately 100 feet above the ground. It is known that this meteorological phenomenon can produce optical effects and can trap radiation, creating conditions that both enhance and distort atmospheric observations. Around 9:30 p.m., as Dr. R and Michelle D packed their equipment in the parking area near Norris, they noticed unusual lights appearing over the most active portion of the geyser basin. The lights began as 3 distinct points of illumination, brighter than stars but exhibiting movement patterns that clearly distinguished them from conventional aircraft. "I remember my first thought being military helicopters," R later recalled. But those lights were completely silent, and their movement was unlike any known aircraft. The objects, with both witnesses agreeing they appeared solid rather than merely luminous, moved in precise geometric formations above the thermal features. They would hover motionless for several minutes, then accelerate rapidly to new positions, repeating these maneuvers in patterns that seemed deliberately coordinated. Michelle D's familiarity with aircraft operations around Yellowstone made her quite qualified to assess what they were observing. Winter flight operations in the park were extremely limited, and she knew of no scheduled air traffic for that evening. The object's behavior violated numerous principles of conventional aerodynamics, specifically their ability to hover without generating any detectable sound. Michelle had said they weren't following flight paths that made sense for helicopters or fixed-wing aircraft. They moved with instant acceleration, perfect right-angle turns. I'd never seen anything like it. Now, the electromagnetic environment around Norris Geyser Basin adds crucial context to their encounter. USGS monitoring equipment regularly detects magnetic field variations in the area, with underground geothermal activity creating electrical currents which affect sensitive instruments. Scientists have documented ball lightning formation during specific atmospheric conditions, when electromagnetic discharges from thermal features interact with temperature inversions and moisture in the air. However, what Dr. R and Michelle D observed exceeded any documented natural electromagnetic phenomena. The objects appeared metallic in the moonlight, with clearly defined shapes rather than some amorphous appearance, which would be more akin to the appearance of ball lightning or plasma formations. Their coordinated movement suggested intelligence and purpose, not natural randomness. The encounter intensified when the objects began interacting directly with the geothermal features below them. The 3 lights moved over Steamboat Geyser, Norris Basin's largest feature. The geyser began exhibiting unusual activity. Its steam output increased dramatically, and the ground tremors that typically precede major eruptions began registering on Dr. R's seismic monitoring equipment. Michelle noted that smaller hot springs nearby began bubbling more vigorously, and steam vents that had been dormant suddenly became active. The most remarkable aspect of the encounter occurred when one of the objects descended to within an estimated 50 feet of the ground, hovering directly above a cluster of hot springs in the basin's most active section. At this close range, both witnesses observed structural details that confirmed their impression of artificial origin. Michelle describes a definite shape that was angular and swears she saw panels or sections on its surface. And Dr. R noted the object generated no visible exhaust, no downwash, no air disturbance, and produced no sound despite its proximity to their position. These characteristics put any natural explanations to bed. at least for our witnesses here. After approximately 15 minutes of close observation, the objects began to ascend in a coordinated formation. They gained altitude rapidly, maintaining their triangular arrangement while moving toward the northeast. Within moments, they had climbed beyond visual range, leaving Dr. R and Michelle D standing in the sudden quiet of the winter night. Hey, Darkness Prevails here. I hope you enjoyed this little experimental episode of submissions I've received, told in documentary eyewitness format. I'll be back soon with my typical horror storytelling, so don't worry. Till then, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.